What I'd like to talk about a little bit now is what's happening in Hawaii and what it means for the world. In 1893, a small group of people, unhappy with the fact that Hawaii had to pay a tariff on sugar sent to the United States, decided to overthrow the government of the Kingdom of Hawaii and annex Hawaii to the United States so they wouldn't have to pay the tariff. This group, Committee of Public Safety, seized the Queen Liliuokalani. The United States minister here in the islands landed Marines and pointed cannon at the royal palace. And the Queen, in order to avoid bloodshed, stepped aside temporarily and placed her faith in the United States government and its people to restore her to her throne. And the President of the United States at that time said that the overthrow was an act of war against the nation with which the United States had a treaty of friendship, and that the Queen should be restored to her throne. The provisional government that was set up didn't pay any attention to that and kept pursuing annexation. Eventually another president came into office who supported annexation, and a bill was introduced in Congress. They could not get the 2/3 votes needed to annex Hawaii properly, so they went with a joint resolution of Congress and annexed Hawaii in that fashion. From the very first day of the overthrow, the Hawaiian people have been working to restore their nation, and they continue to do so today with help from people from around the world who have come to Hawaii to help and have fallen in love with Hawaii and believe that the right thing to do is to put the Hawaiian nation back on its tracks and allow it to unfold in its own way without outside interference. This has been known as the sovereignty movement in Hawaii. It takes many different forms. There's lots of different groups out there that have pursued sovereignty in one form or another. We had an interesting legal case recently where at the time of the overthrow there were lands in the kingdom that belonged to the crown or to the kingdom government. These are what are called the kingdom lands, are referred to by people hostile to the idea of restoring the nation as the ceded lands, as if they were ceded by somebody to somebody else, which they never were. But anyway, the provisional government took those lands, passed them on to the Republic of Hawaii, which then passed them to the United States at the time of annexation. And the United States gave the new state of Hawaii those lands to be their public lands, to be held in trust. And the revenues from the land could be used for 5 different purposes. And one of those purposes was the betterment of what they called the native Hawaiians. 1959, this is all put into play. 1978, there's a constitutional convention in Hawaii, and the Constitution is amended to create something called the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. The Office of Hawaiian Affairs is to receive that portion of the revenues from the kingdom lands that is going to the betterment of the native Hawaiians. And eventually they come down to, I guess that should be 20% because there's 5 purposes. So theoretically, 20% of the revenues from these lands taken from the kingdom are to go to the Office of Hawaiian Affairs for the betterment of the Hawaiian people. In the early 1990s, the state of Hawaii started developing some of these lands to give to private hands for one of the 5 purposes, development of low-income housing, affordable housing. But they were going to take lands out of the trust and put them into private hands. A lawsuit was filed by the Office of Hawaiian Affairs against the state, saying that those lands had to be kept in the trust. In 1993, the United States Congress passed and President Clinton signed a resolution apologizing to the Hawaiian people for the illegal overthrow of their government. The resolution stated that the Hawaiian people never gave up their sovereignty, that their lands were taken from them without permission and without compensation, that the lands were an intrinsic part of the spiritual, economic, cultural, social system of the Hawaiian people that they wanted to pass on to future generations, and that there should be a reconciliation process between the United States government and the Native Hawaiians to resolve all the questions created by the illegal overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom government. Based on the apology resolution and other laws passed, the Hawaii Supreme Court ruled that those lands are held in trust until the reconciliation process called for by the apology resolution can take place. And those lands cannot be sold or otherwise disposed of by the state until such time as the reconciliation process is completed. The state appealed the case, asked the United States Supreme Court to take up the case, and the United States Supreme Court did take up the case. When it came time for argument in front of the United States Supreme Court, the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, supposedly there to protect the interests of the Hawaiian people, said the lands belonged to the state of Hawaii, and the Native Hawaiians had a land claim that clouded that title and that should be dealt with. And many people in Hawaii were deeply disappointed in the Office of Hawaiian Affairs for having taken the position that the lands belonged to the state of Hawaii. Just from a legal perspective on this, the provisional government illegally overthrew the kingdom government. Those were actions of those that participated that were subjects of the kingdom committed treason. Those that were outside the subjects of the kingdom and backed up by the United States military committed an act of war and aggression. So no title ever really passed from the kingdom to the provisional government or on to the Republic or the United States or the state of Hawaii. I think legally that's unquestionable. The United States legal system, however, seems to insist that the title somehow did pass. That case really catalyzed the sovereignty movement in Hawaii, where people looked at what was going on and saw that there was really an effort to extinguish the kingdom once and for all going on. And what the United States Supreme Court eventually did, I think in part because they heard from a lot of friends of the court briefs and private letters and other ways, that there was really a lot of issues involved here that had never been adequately addressed, and that they'd opened a can of worms by taking this case. What they eventually did was say the apology resolution has no force of law, and that the Hawaii Supreme Court could not rely on the apology resolution in making their decision. And they sent the case back to the Hawaii Supreme Court for further deliberations for them to make a decision without considering the apology resolution. I, as a lawyer, view that resolution differently than the Supreme Court. I view it as tantamount to admissions that an illegal act took place, that are legally binding on whatever goes forward. That the United States has admitted, and nobody's debating, that the government was illegally overthrown and the lands were taken without compensation or permission, and that action was never ratified by any referendum or plebiscite or anything of the Hawaiian people. So it stands as an illegal act that never gave title to the land, and that the kingdom still exists, it's simply its government has been destroyed. Now, the destruction of the kingdom, the seizure of the queen, was the last act of a long series of acts, which I think under international law qualify as genocide. When the missionaries came in and told the Hawaiian political leadership that the traditional practitioners were agents of the devil and convinced the Hawaiian Christians to destroy the traditional religious institutions, that was aimed at destroying the highest authority of the Hawaiian civilization, the kahunas, the spiritual practitioners.